The Vorthak Institute's Department of Primitive Cultural Studies had catalogued the folklore of 1,700 species without a single researcher requiring psychological rehabilitation. Dr. Keth Morrigan figured this streak would continue indefinitely, right up until the moment 3 of his most decorated xenohistorians walked into his office looking like they'd witnessed their own funerals. "The human assignment," announced Dr. Zef Kalantos, settling her crystalline bulk into the reinforced chair with all the enthusiasm of someone preparing for root surgery. "We need to discuss parameters." Keth Morrigan's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "Parameters for cataloging the bedtime stories of a pre-warp civilization? What's next? Tactical briefings for studying butterfly migrations?" "That's precisely the problem," interjected Helix 9, the synthetic consciousness whose academic credentials were carved into quantum matrices rather than printed on organic material. "These aren't bedtime stories. We've been monitoring their information networks for preliminary research, and their mythology contains technical specifications." The department head's amusement flickered. "Elaborate." Dr. Orn Thesick, whose people had perfected bureaucratic precision across 4 millennia, consulted his datapad with practiced efficiency. "Human flood narratives include precise descriptions of geological stratification patterns consistent with actual planetary water displacement events. Their creation stories reference genetic markers that shouldn't exist in pre-scientific thinking. And their apocalyptic literature," he paused, mandibles twitching, "contains survival protocols that would make our emergency response teams jealous." "You're suggesting their fiction is factual?" Keth Morrigan's tone suggested he was reconsidering the psychological rehabilitation policy. "We're suggesting," Zef Kalantos said, "that humans might not understand the difference." The 3 scholars had volunteered for Earth assignment expecting the usual: primitive creation myths involving cosmic eggs or world trees, hero journeys with predictable moral frameworks, and the standard pantheon of anthropomorphized natural forces. Instead, their preliminary scans had uncovered something far more disturbing. "Show him the flood data," Helix 9 suggested. Orn Thesick activated the holographic display, filling the office with swirling data streams. "Every human culture contains detailed accounts of planetary water displacement events, not just big floods, specific descriptions of ocean redistribution, atmospheric changes, and recovery protocols. The Mesopotamian version includes agricultural restoration techniques. The Norse accounts detail societal restructuring methods. The indigenous American narratives contain genetic diversity preservation strategies." "Coincidence," Keth Morrigan said, though his certainty was developing cracks. "Planetary. Civilizations experience flooding. They remember. They exaggerate. The dates match," Zef Kalantos countered, "across cultures that had no contact with each other, and the geological evidence supports their claims." Helix 9's projection flickered, the synthetic equivalent of nervous laughter. "It gets worse. Their mythological timeline includes multiple extinction events, recovery periods, and what they casually refer to as the time the sky caught fire, with enough astronomical detail to suggest they weren't speaking metaphorically." The office fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the Institute's environmental systems. Finally, Keith Morrigan spoke. "You're telling me that a species we classified as charmingly primitive might actually be documenting real events that would have sterilized any other known civilization?" "We're telling you," Orn Thesick said, "that we need permission to conduct a full historical investigation instead of a folklore survey. Because if humans are casually preserving actual survival records in their mythology, then either they're the most sophisticated information preservation society we've encountered, or what? Or they've survived things that the rest of us couldn't, and they remember how." Keth Morrigan's expression shifted through several emotional registers before settling on professional concern. The consortium expects a standard cultural analysis report. Primitive mythology, categorized and filed, not a dissertation on impossible human resilience. The humans have a saying, Helix 9 observed. Truth is stranger than fiction. We're beginning to suspect they mean that literally. Zeph Kalantos leaned forward, her crystalline form refracting the holographic data into prismatic patterns. Look at their dragon stories. Every culture has them. We assumed metaphorical representations of natural forces or tribal memories of large predators. But their descriptions include flight mechanics that demonstrate understanding of aerodynamics, fire production systems that mirror actual thermochemical processes, and behavioral patterns consistent with apex predator territorial management. You're suggesting dragons were real? The department head's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. We're suggesting, Orn Thesic said, that humans describe impossible things with impossible accuracy. Either they possess the most sophisticated imagination in known space, or they're recording actual encounters with things we've never seen. The silence stretched until Keth Morrigan finally activated his authorization terminal. Full investigative parameters approved, but I want regular reports. If you discover that humans are somehow more advanced than our preliminary assessment suggested, the consortium needs to know immediately. Understood, the three scholars said in unison. And team, Keth Morrigan added as they prepared to leave. If you find evidence that human mythology is actually historical, documentation of survival events, try not to think too hard about what that implies for the rest of us. The door sealed behind them, leaving Keth Morrigan alone with the uncomfortable realization that his department's perfect record might be about to end in the most disturbing way possible. Outside, 3 of the Institute's most respected researchers began preparing for an investigation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about primitive civilizations, advanced cultures, and the uncomfortable space between mythology and memory. None of them suspected that by the time they returned, they would envy the blissful ignorance they were about to lose forever. 3 weeks into their Earth study, the research team had developed what Helix 9 privately termed acquisition anxiety, the growing dread that comes from accumulating too much contradictory evidence. They'd established a research station in Earth's outer system, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to intercept the planet's chaotic information broadcasts. I've been analyzing their construction mythology, Zeph Kalantos announced during their morning briefing, her crystalline form dim with exhaustion. Humans claim their ancestors built structures that defy gravitational physics, using nothing but determination and really big rocks. The troubling part? Their mathematics work out. Orn Thesic looked up from his own research, mandibles twitching with frustration. Define workout. The Pyramid of Giza, according to human records, built by a civilization using copper tools and wooden ramps. The engineering analysis I've run suggests that construction method would require 17,000 years and violate several laws of structural mechanics. She paused. Yet there it sits, perfectly aligned to stellar coordinates they supposedly couldn't calculate. Helix 9's projection solidified into what might charitably be called skeptical. Perhaps they're simply bad at remembering their own technological capabilities. That's what I thought until I found the redundant verification systems. Zeph Kalantos activated a new display. Every major human construction project includes multiple independent confirmation methods embedded in the structure itself. Star alignments, mathematical constants, geological markers, all cross-referencing the same impossible timeline. Orn Thesic set down his datapad with deliberate precision. My investigation into their survival narratives has produced similar inconsistencies. Humans possess detailed oral traditions describing recovery from asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and what they euphemistically call ice ages, with casualness that suggests routine experience. How routine? Helix 9 asked. They have specialized vocabulary for post-apocalyptic resource management that appears in languages separated by continents and millennia. Terms for edible plants that grow in volcanic soil, water purification using ash, filtration, and genetic bottleneck recovery protocols embedded so deeply in their linguistic structures that they use them in children's songs. The synthetic consciousness processed this information with visible effort. Children's songs about genetic bottleneck recovery? Ring around the rosy, Ornthesic said grimly. Initially catalogued as harmless nursery rhyme, actually describes plague symptom recognition, community quarantine procedures, and mortality acceptance rituals. They teach survival protocols to their offspring through recreational activities. Zefkalantos's form brightened with sudden realization. That explains their entertainment preferences. I've been cataloging their fictional media, assuming it would reveal psychological needs and cultural values. Instead, I found instruction manuals disguised as adventure stories. Elaborate. Their zombie apocalypse genre contains comprehensive guides for maintaining infrastructure during societal collapse, preserving knowledge through distributed networks, and rebuilding civilization from small surviving populations. Their alien invasion stories detail tactical responses to technologically superior adversaries. Their natural disaster films are essentially training videos for climate adaptation. Helix 9's projection flickered rapidly, the synthetic equivalent of nervous breakdown. Are you suggesting that human entertainment is actually educational material? I'm suggesting that humans don't distinguish between entertainment and education the way we do. They embed practical knowledge in recreational formats because… Zefkalantos paused, her form dimming as she processed the implications. Because they expect to need it. The briefing room fell silent as each researcher contemplated their growing pile of impossible evidence. Finally, Ornthesic spoke. We need to discuss the temporal problem. What temporal problem? Helix 9 asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected. Human historical records extend far beyond what their supposed technological development should allow. They describe astronomical events from before their written language existed. They reference genetic information from periods when they allegedly believed in spontaneous generation. They document technological processes they claim to have forgotten. Zefkalantos's crystalline structure began resonating with harmonic frequencies, a sign of deep distress among her people. You're suggesting their timeline is wrong? I'm suggesting their timeline is impossible. According to their own records, humans have been behaviorally modern for over 200,000 years. Most species achieve spaceflight within 50,000 years of developing complex language. Humans had complex language 200 millennia ago, and only achieved spaceflight within the last century. Meaning what? Ornthesic's mandibles clicked in the rhythm his species used for delivering bad news. Meaning, either they're extraordinarily slow learners, or they've been repeatedly set back to pre-technological states and forced to restart their civilization from scratch. Multiple times. The implications hung in the air like toxic gas. Helix 9 was the first to voice what they were all thinking. If humans have rebuilt their civilization multiple times, retaining enough knowledge to survive repeated catastrophic setbacks while encoding survival information in their cultural DNA… Then they're not primitive, Zefkalantos finished. They're the most advanced disaster recovery specialists in known space, and we've been studying them like they're children playing with blocks. Ornthesic accessed his priority communication array. I'm requesting additional analytical resources from the Institute. This investigation has moved beyond cultural studies into the realm of species threat assessment. Threat assessment? Helix 9 queried. Think about it. If humans have survived and recovered from multiple civilization-ending events while maintaining cultural continuity and technological knowledge, what does that say about their adaptability, their resilience, their capacity to survive conditions that would sterilize our worlds? The three scholars stared at each other across the briefing table, each contemplating the same uncomfortable question. If humans were this formidable as a pre-warp species, what would they become once they joined the galactic community? Outside their research station, Earth continued its lazy rotation, broadcasting its chaotic mix of entertainment, communication, and what they now suspected were carefully disguised survival manuals to anyone sophisticated enough to intercept and decode them. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, almost pastoral. None of the researchers found that appearance comforting anymore. The breakthrough came from the most mundane source imaginable: human recipe collections. Helix 9 had been analyzing domestic cultural patterns when he stumbled across cooking instructions that made his quantum processors stutter. "Colleagues," he announced during their emergency session, "we need to discuss bread." "Bread?" Zeph Kalantos's form pulsed with incredulity. "We're investigating potential galactic-scale implications, and you want to discuss baked goods?" "Sourdough starter maintenance, specifically." The synthetics projection stabilized into academic formality. "Humans maintain colonies of microorganisms for food production, nothing unusual there. But their care instructions include protocols for preserving starter cultures through nuclear winter, societal collapse, and extended nomadic periods. They have standardized procedures for reconstituting dried cultures using whatever water source remains available." Ornthesic's attention sharpened. "Define standardized." "Global distribution of identical preservation techniques across cultures with no historical contact. Optimal calorie-to-resource ratios calculated for extended crisis periods. Fermentation timing adjusted for reduced sunlight conditions. They're not just making bread, they're maintaining civilization backup systems in their kitchens." The briefing room's environmental systems hummed louder as Zeph Kalantos processed this information through her crystalline matrix. "That aligns with my architectural findings. Human-dwelling construction consistently includes features they term root cellars, storm shelters, and emergency supply storage as standard domestic elements, not luxury additions, baseline requirements." Meaning? Meaning humans design their homes assuming regular catastrophic events. Their residential architecture includes blast-resistant features, underground storage, and isolated power generation because they expect to need them. Ornthesic had gone very still, never a positive sign among his species. "I've been analyzing their educational curriculum standards. Humans teach their young practical skills that include wilderness survival, basic medical treatment, emergency food procurement, and rudimentary engineering. They call this being well-rounded. Other species teach art appreciation and philosophical debate," Helix 9 observed. "Exactly. Human children learn to identify edible plants, treat radiation exposure, and construct temporary shelters before they're considered educated adults. Their schools function as survival training academies disguised as knowledge institutions." The implications crystallized with awful clarity. Zeph Kalantos began resonating at frequencies that made the station's hull vibrate. "We've been approaching this backwards. We assumed their mythology preserved memories of ancient catastrophes. But what if their entire culture is oriented around preparing for future ones? Elaborate. Every human cultural tradition we've studied serves dual purposes: religious ceremonies that double as community coordination exercises, artistic expressions that encode technical information, social structures designed for rapid resource redistribution during emergencies. Her form brightened to painful intensity. They're not remembering disasters. They're rehearsing for them. Ornthesic accessed his personal files, mandibles clicking in the rhythm reserved for paradigm shifts. The missing piece, human risk assessment. They routinely prepare for scenarios other species would classify as statistically impossible. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, gamma-ray bursts, artificial intelligence rebellion, ecosystem collapse. And, Helix 9 prompted, and their preparation isn't theoretical. They've developed practical countermeasures for extinction-level events because they believe these events are inevitable. Not possible, inevitable. The research station's lighting seemed to dim as the three scholars contemplated what they'd uncovered. Finally, Helix 9 spoke. "We need to contact the Institute immediately." "To report what, exactly?" Zeph Kalantos asked. "That humans are the most paranoid species in known space?" "No," Ornthesic said grimly. "To report that human paranoia is justified. Their cultural patterns suggest they've survived multiple extinction events by maintaining species-wide preparation protocols embedded in daily life. They're not primitive survivors. They're professional survivors." Professional? Consider the evidence holistically. Humans maintain genetic diversity through cultural mixing practices they call travel and immigration. They preserve technological knowledge through distributed storage systems they call education and entertainment. They practice resource management through economic systems designed for rapid restructuring during crisis periods. Helix 9's projection flickered through several emotional subroutines. "You're suggesting human civilization is explicitly designed for catastrophic resilience." "I'm suggesting human civilization is the most sophisticated disaster recovery system we've encountered, and they've disguised it as primitive culture to avoid drawing attention." The silence that followed was broken only by the quiet efficiency of the station's life support systems. Systems that, they now realized, would fail catastrophically if faced with the kind of routine disasters humans apparently considered normal. Zeph Kalantos dimmed to barely visible levels. "We have to report this. The consortium needs to know that our preliminary assessment was completely wrong." "Wrong how?" Ornthesic asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "We classified humans as primitive pre-warp civilization suitable for limited cultural contact. But if our analysis is correct, they're actually advanced post-catastrophe civilization with extensive experience surviving conditions that would eliminate other spacefaring species. The reclassification implications are terrifying," Helix 9 finished. "If humans join the galactic community, they'll be the only member species with practical experience managing existential crises. Everyone else will be dependent on their expertise for survival guidance." Ornthesic began composing their preliminary report, each keystroke feeling like another step toward an uncomfortable future. "We came here to study primitive mythology. Instead, we've discovered that the most advanced species in known space has been hiding behind a facade of cultural backwardness while perfecting survival techniques we didn't know were possible. And now we have to explain to our superiors," Zeph Kalantos said, "that the primitive humans we were sent to study are actually better prepared for cosmic catastrophes than any civilization in consortium space." Outside their research station, Earth continued broadcasting its mixture of entertainment, communication, and carefully disguised preparation manuals. The planet still looked peaceful from this distance, but none of them could ignore the uncomfortable truth they'd uncovered. Humanity wasn't primitive. The rest of the galaxy was soft. 6 months after their departure, the three scholars materialized in the Institute's transport bay, looking like refugees from their own research. Keth Morrigan took one look at their condition and immediately scheduled them for psychological evaluation. "Absolutely not," Zeph Kalantos said, her crystalline form flickering with barely contained energy. We need to brief the Consortium Council before anyone decides we're suffering from deep space psychosis. You look like you've been chewed up by a probability storm and spat out backwards, the department head observed. What exactly happened out there? Helix 9's projection solidified with grim determination. We learned that every comfortable assumption we make about civilization is wrong. The debriefing room filled with the quiet tension that precedes paradigm collapse. Orn Thesic activated the holographic display, filling the space with data streams that pulsed like neural networks. The consortium classifies species based on technological achievement, social complexity, and cultural sophistication. We've been using the wrong metrics. Explain. We measure advancement by how far a species has moved beyond survival necessities. Humans measure advancement by how well they've integrated survival necessities into complex social structures. We've eliminated scarcity. They've weaponized it. Keth Morrigan's mandibles stopped their nervous clicking entirely. Weaponized scarcity? Zeph Kalantos's form brightened to painful intensity. Human economic systems are designed to function during resource collapse. Their political structures assume regular governmental failure. Their social bonds strengthen under pressure rather than fracturing. They've built a civilization that becomes more efficient as conditions worsen. That's impossible. That's human, Orn Thesic corrected. We discovered that what we interpreted as primitive mythology was actually operational documentation. Humans don't just survive catastrophes. They've developed cultural mechanisms for thriving during apocalyptic conditions. The silence stretched until Helix 9 broke it with synthetic precision. We need to discuss reclassification protocols. Humans cannot be integrated into consortium space under current xenological frameworks. Why not? Because they'll make everyone else obsolete. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every consortium species has evolved in stable environments with predictable resources. Our technologies assume consistent power sources. Our societies require steady economic growth. Our psychologies depend on security and routine. Orn Thesic gestured to the swirling data displays. Humans have spent 200,000 years perfecting adaptation to chaos. They've developed technologies that function without infrastructure, social systems that operate through collapse cycles, and psychological frameworks that treat uncertainty as normal operating conditions. You're describing a species of professional survivors. We're describing a species that makes professional survivors look like pampered academics, Zeph Kalantos said, which, coincidentally, is exactly what we are. The implications rippled outward like cracks in brittle crystal. Keth Morrigan accessed his priority channels, already composing alerts that would reshape consortium policy. If humans join galactic civilization, they won't join it, Helix 9 interrupted. They'll inherit it, because when the next cosmic catastrophe arrives, and human cultural patterns suggest they believe it's inevitable rather than possible, every other species will be dependent on human expertise for basic survival. The next catastrophe. Gamma ray bursts, rogue artificial intelligences, ecosystem collapse, stellar engineering failures, dark matter interactions. Orn Thesic's mandibles clicked through the litany with mechanical precision. Humans prepare for all of them simultaneously because they assume these events follow cyclical patterns rather than random occurrence. And they're probably right, Zeph Kalantos added. Their historical records suggest they've survived variants of most cosmic disasters, multiple times. The debriefing room's environmental systems labored to process the emotional stress radiating from its occupants. Finally, Keth Morrigan spoke. What are you recommending? Honest reclassification, Helix 9 said. Humans aren't a primitive pre-warp species suitable for cultural exchange. They're a post-catastrophe civilization with advanced disaster management capabilities that exceed anything in consortium space. Followed by careful diplomatic contact designed around learning from them rather than teaching them, Ornthesic added. Because when cosmic conditions deteriorate, and they will, humanity will be the only species with practical experience maintaining technological civilization through impossible circumstances. Zeph Kalantos dimmed to barely visible levels. We went to study their charming primitive stories about floods and dragons. We discovered that their stories are actually technical manuals for surviving planetary catastrophes and maintaining genetic diversity through population bottlenecks. The worst part, Helix 9 observed, is that they don't even realize how extraordinary they are. They assume every intelligent species develops this way. They think disaster preparation is normal. Maybe, Keth Morrigan said quietly. It should be. The three scholars looked at each other across the conference table, each processing the uncomfortable realization that their investigation had fundamentally altered their understanding of what constituted advanced civilization. They'd departed as respected xenohistorians studying primitive folklore. They were returning as prophets of a future where survival skills mattered more than technological sophistication. Outside the Institute, consortium civilization continued its comfortable routine of predictable resource flows, stable governance, and carefully managed cultural development. Ships moved along established trade routes, academic institutions pursued theoretical knowledge, and billions of sapient beings lived lives insulated from uncertainty. None of them realized that their comfortable existence made them primitives by the standards of a species that had learned to thrive in chaos, prosper through disaster, and preserve knowledge through the collapse of worlds. The three scholars had left to catalog quaint human mythology. They'd returned with the uncomfortable knowledge that when cosmic conditions inevitably deteriorated, the primitive humans would be the only ones prepared to rebuild civilization from whatever remained. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They'd gone seeking stories about survival, only to discover they were the ones who needed to learn how to survive.